This is the full story of how the head of the Nigerian Army Physical Training Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Bukasuka Dimka, assassinated the head of state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, General Murtala Muhammed, on February 13, 1976. In the early hours of Friday, February 13, 1976, the Nigerian military head of state, General Murtala Muhammed, was assassinated on his way back to work in a black Mercedes-Benz car without escorts. The unprotected car had slowed down at the junction in front of the Federal Secretariat in Ikoyi, Lagos, when a hit team which allegedly included Lieutenant William Seri and others casually strolled up and riddled it with bullets. When it was confirmed that the head of state had died, Lieutenant Colonel Bukasuka Dimka, who had spent the bulk of the previous night drinking champagne with a few others, hurried to the British High Commission at around 8 a.m. and asked to be put in contact with General Yakubu Gowon in Britain. He is said to have sent a message for Gowon to travel to Togo and await further instructions. Then Dimka went back to Ikoyi to take control of the radio station, initially with the help of 6 other people. It is believed that Abdulkarim Zakari, a civilian employee, personally chose the martial music that was played, having been informed in advance to do so. At the same time, other hit teams targeted other important members of the regime's troika, including Lieutenant Generals Olusegun Obasanjo, the Chief of Staff, Supreme Headquarters, and Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma, the Chief of Staff, Nigerian Army. They also targeted Colonels David Jemi Bewon and Ibrahim Taiwo, the military governors of Oyo and Kwara states, respectively. Taiwo, who took part in the coup that removed Gowon and brought Murtala Muhammed to power in July 1975, was murdered, but Jemi Bewon managed to escape. University students in Lagos, Ibadan, and other cities protested the coup in the streets, while the military made measures to put an end to the uprising. Later, several students damaged American and British establishments in Lagos after it was revealed that Dimka had visited the British High Commission on the day of the coup. 7 hours later, the coup attempt was crushed by forces rallied and led by Danjuma from a temporary base at Bonny Camp. His designated assassin, Lieutenant Lawrence Garba, had decided at the last minute to spare the army chief at the Marina Jetty, allegedly in part to avoid collateral casualties. Danjuma had a quick war council with Colonels Domkat Bali and Ibrahim Babangida when he heard the radio reports. In order to obtain armored vehicles, Babangida was dispatched to Ikeja cantonment on a motorcycle. He went to Radio Nigeria with the use of these cars, where he spoke with his close friend Dimka. When Babangida first arrived, Dimka asked him if he was coming to play Chukuma and Nwawo with him, making a historical comparison to the negotiations that took place in Kaduna in January 1966 between Colonel Conrad Nwawo on behalf of Major General Aguiyi and Major Patrick Chukwuma Nzeogu. Nevertheless, Dimka requested that the armored trucks be removed after growing uncomfortable about their presence in the background. However, Danjuma's orders to Babangida had been to stop the broadcast by any means necessary, including destruction by shelling, rather than to negotiate a surrender. When he made contact with Bonny Camp to report his activities at the radio station, this order was reiterated to him by General Danjuma, incredulous that a conversation with Dimka had even occurred and that the radio station was still playing Dimka's broadcasts. A brief but fierce firefight, reportedly led by Major Chris Ugokwe, subsequently dislodged the coup plotters from the station. After the gunfire began, Dimka just turned and left through multiple checkpoints and, avoiding the military stationed around the building, initially went to Jos and then Abakaliki, where he was apprehended by the police while in the company of a prostitute. The public's disbelief at Dimka's escape from Radio Nigeria at the time gave rise to rumors that he received assistance. But how did Obasanjo escape? According to General Obasanjo, Brigadier Olubajowa's visit to seek a name for his new baby caused him to be late in leaving for work that day. Obasanjo carried out an escape and evasion maneuver when it became clear that there were problems. He then spent the majority of the day at the home of a civilian friend in Ikoyi, keeping an eye on things over the phone before he later emerged to assume the position of head of state. Along Awolowo Road in Lagos, Obasanjo's would-be killers mistook him for Colonel Dumuje, severely injuring the senior officer. The exact circumstances surrounding that incident are still unknown, especially considering that a lieutenant general's vehicle would have had 3 stars displayed on its license plates. Whether Dumuje was riding in Obasanjo's car is a curious possibility that has never been clarified. Or perhaps the hitmen were just drunk and could not tell one plate from another. Evidence subsequently uncovered inside the station, purportedly derived from documents and tapes, indicates that Dimka had prepared a second speech that he was never able to broadcast. However, the Obasanjo regime released a public statement in which it offered its own justification for the Dimka Coup attempt. The government provided the following 4 justifications. 1. The plotters believed that Nigeria was moving towards a communist state and giving up its long-standing non-aligned stance under the Murtala regime. 2. The plotters objected to Danjuma's nomination as army chief and recent army promotions. 3. The conspirators wanted to put General Gowon back in charge of the country. And 4. The plotters wanted to reinstate all former military governors and retired civil servants. Obasanjo then declared 7 days of national mourning and ordered that flags should be flown at half-mast. So, how was Gowon implicated? A formal request for General Yakubu Gowon's extradition from Britain was made on March 24, 1976, in response to Obasanjo regime's belief at the time that the former head of state knew and by implication approved of the plot, based on Dimka's testimony regarding a brief encounter during a trip he had made earlier to London. Even Gowon vehemently refuted the accusation. The British government denied the request for extradition and made it clear through unofficial channels that Nigerian officials should be ready to face British indifference if, as individuals, they were to find themselves in exile in the future if the Nigerian government pressed too much on getting Gowon back. Although retired, Yakubu Gowon was dismissed from the Nigerian army without being given a chance to defend himself, and as a result, diplomatic ties with Britain publicly collapsed. President Shehu Shagari later reinstated him and restored his benefits. After the coup failed, as was to be expected, a large number of people were arrested, including civilians in addition to active duty and retired officers and soldiers. While receiving treatment at the military hospital in Lagos, Major C.D. Dabang, an inner circle officer, begged Dimka to postpone the coup until he recovered sufficiently to participate. At that point, troops showed up, unplugged his drip and carried him away. Numerous significant figures of the Gowon regime were detained and interrogated. A minimum of 2 boards of inquiry convened, with Brigadiers Obada and Eromobo serving as their chairs. The Supreme Military Council upheld death sentences that had been handed over by a different special military tribunal. However, it remains unclear to this day to what extent certain individuals who were shot were actually involved in the Dimka Coup. Brigadier Shehu Musa Yaradua, who had recently been twice promoted from the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, announced the first batch of executions. Another batch, including Dimka himself, was to follow the next morning. Nevertheless, Corporal Dauda Usman and Sergeant Clement Yuda, 2 non-commissioned officers, escaped and were never found. They were declared wanted. To this day, they are yet to be found. A total of 29 officers, including Dimka himself and the Commissioner of Defense, Major General Ilia Bisala, were executed. Also executed was a former governor of Benue Plateau, Joseph Gomwalk. 7 non-commissioned officers and the civilian Abdul Karim Zakari were executed as well. Others were retired or dismissed or imprisoned. Family members of General Yakubu Gowon, who served in the military, were harassed or imprisoned. However, in an interview in 1981, Lieutenant General Alani Akinrinade, a former member of the Supreme Military Council, freely acknowledged that there was no compelling evidence against Gowon. The Dimka Coup would have short and long-term consequences. Let's take a look at some of them. Although the new Obasanjo regime that came to office against Obasanjo's personal wish and desire pledged to continue Murtala Muhammed's policies, the so-called Dimka Coup had lasting military and non-military, judicial, domestic and foreign policy effects. It was the first time since the executions of Banjo, Ifeajuna, Alale and Agbam on September 25, 1967 in Enugu by Emeka Ojukwu that anyone was being executed for that alleged offense within Nigeria's colonial borders. The Dimka Coup led to the promulgation by the Obasanjo regime of certain retrospective decrees which made concealment of treason an offense punishable with a life sentence and created new special military tribunal laws justifying mass executions for coup participation, which remained until the return of democracy in 1999. Indeed, when General Obasanjo was tried in 1995 on suspicion of concealment of treason by the Abacha regime, it was the law he signed into effect just under 20 years before, which was pulled off the shelf and used to charge him. It later emerged that the charge was frivolous and he was lucky to have survived the Abacha Gulag. The Dimka Coup was a national security embarrassment. Efforts by the Inspector General of Police MD Yusuf to resign were rebuffed, but the coup led directly to the creation of the National Security Organization (NSO), whose first director, then Brigadier Abdullahi Mohammed, was recalled from his post as a governor. However, the existence since 1976 of the NSO and its byproduct, the State Security Service (SSS), did not stop coups in Nigeria, as more would happen in the next decade. Except for the use of Pojo cars, the so-called low-profile policy of the Mohammed regime was largely jettisoned. Key figures became better protected by accompanying troops. The Brigade of Guards was disbanded and no troops were rotated in. The leadership style of the regime also changed. Mohammed's hard-charging, occasionally impulsive style was replaced by a steadier and level-headed but still dictatorial approach. Brigadier Shehu Yaradua's new role in the Troika as Chief of Staff, Supreme Headquarters, launched him into his subsequent national political career when he left office. Other relationships forged in the trials and tribulations of the painful events surrounding the Dimka Coup were to last for many years after, such as that between President Olusegun Obasanjo, his Defense Minister Lieutenant General T.Y. Danjuma, and his Chief of Staff Major General Abdullahi Muhammed. Although already known for toughness from his July 1966 and Civil War days, General Danjuma's stature as the man in charge of the army was reinforced by his bold leadership during the coup. Indeed, he could quite easily have taken over the country if he wanted, assuming meanings would not have been read into it by geopolitical pundits. Then Colonel Ibrahim Babangida became a pop hero for supposedly flushing Dimka out of Radio Nigeria, although the exact nature of his negotiation with Dimka was never clarified. He was to emerge again on the national scene in 1983 and 1985. The diplomatic effects, particularly on Anglo-Nigerian relations, became strained. Britain and Nigeria recalled their ambassadors, and it was not until 1979 that the resident Nigerian High Commissioner in London was replaced. Domestically, the coup crystallized political tensions between the Muslim Far North and the Christian Middle Belt, which were not altogether new, but have persisted in one form or another. As can be recognized, most of those executed were of Plateau State origin. Lastly, the Dimka coup made the late General Murtala Muhammed a hero and whitewashed his ignominious roles in Nigeria's military and political history. Apart from his state burial, naming monuments after him, especially the country's busiest airports, and fulfilling obligations for his pension and gratuity as a four-star general, the Nigerian government infused a large amount of cash directly into Murtala Muhammed's estate to protect his family from future financial embarrassments. On September 21, 1978, General Olusegun Obasanjo repealed the prohibition on political parties. The Constituent Assembly then delivered a draft constitution that same day that established Nigeria's presidential system of government and would usher in the Second Republic. It was modeled after the American presidential system. On August 11, 1979, Alhaji Shehu Shagari of the National Party of Nigeria (NPN) won the presidency with 34% of the votes. On October 1, 1979, he began his tenure as Nigeria's first executive president and the revised constitution became operative. Although a majority of the senior officers in the army did not support the transfer of power to the civilians in 1979, the failure of these civilians and the grave economic and political situations Nigeria found itself in gave them the perfect opportunity to strike. On December 31, 1983, just 3 months into its second term, the army overthrew the civilian government of Shagari and effectively ended the Second Republic. On January 1, 1984, Major General Muhammadu Buhari made his maiden broadcast as Nigeria's new head of state. He would be the 5th military man to assume power. You can learn more about the Buhari coup in our next episode.